It's extremely heartening to see this very large turnout of our community to mark this most important space in time. Today, or tonight, London time, the 10th Olympic Games since the Munich Games that took place in 1972 will commence in London. The International Olympic Committee has despicably chosen once again to ignore the death of 11 Israeli athletes who were murdered in the Olympic Village while they were participating in the Munich Olympics in 1972. And whilst world leaders, including our own Prime Minister, President Barack Obama and several other world leaders have sought to intervene on behalf of the family of the murdered athletes to ask the IOC to reconsider its decision, the IOC has steadfastly refused to conduct a commemoration at the opening ceremony. For whatever reason they make their choices, that's a matter for them, but that in no way lessens the intensity of the memory for those who lived through those days and for those who have seen those searing pictures of those days since 1972. The Olympics, starting in 1956 in Melbourne, and I'd just like to acknowledge the fact that we actually have at least 2 Jewish Olympians in the audience. One of whom was at the 1960 Rome Games, I believe, and the other one at the 1956 Melbourne Games. The 1956 Melbourne Games commenced what was known, what we see today as something all the time. At the end of the closing ceremony, instead of the athletes marching in team by team, the entire Olympic family marched into the stadium. And that was something that was commenced in Melbourne in 1956, and Melbourne was known then as the Friendly Games for that very reason. People came together, athletes came together, many of them from countries that were in conflict with each other, and celebrated that Olympics in a way that has now become the standard by which all Olympics are commemorated. In 1972, there was a pall cast over the Olympics by the horrible acts of the terrorists who chose their targets because they were Jews and because they were Israelis, and sought to make a world issue at a time when the world was supposed to be at peace. We gather here today to remember our fallen athletes and to pay tribute to them, and to do that which the IOC refuses to do, to mark a minute's silence in their memory. We'll now have a short AV presentation.
For 22 hours, the world watched and waited. We hoped for the best and feared the worst. On September 5th, 1972, terror took the world stage.
Good afternoon. I'm Jim McKay speaking to you live at this moment from ABC headquarters just outside the Olympic Village in Munich, West Germany. The peace of what have been called the Serene Olympics was shattered just before dawn this morning, about 5 o'clock, when Arab terrorists armed with submachine guns went to the headquarters of the Israeli team and immediately killed one man. They've been holding 14 others hostage since then, and the latest report is that one more has been killed.
You call me back, please.
There was a great applause when the nation of Israel walked in here. And of course, you can't be in Germany and not remember. We're just about 15 miles here from the concentration camp at Dachau. But it is perhaps a measure of the fact that people and times and nations do change, that Israel is here, the Germans are cheering the Jewish athletes.
The dawn of September 5th, 1972 began a day that still horrifies. About 4:15 a.m., 8 men dressed in tracksuits climbed the unguarded 6-foot perimeter fence around the Olympic Village. Once inside the fence, the men, carrying athletic bags filled with Kalashnikov rifles and hand grenades, made their way to Connollystrasse and crept inside Building 31, the living quarters of the Israeli athletes.
they had set a deadline of noon, which is just an hour and 15 minutes ago, saying that they were going to kill all of their hostages at that time. That deadline obviously has passed. There has been no more action that we know of. Peter Jennings is inside the village. Let's go to Peter now.
Jim, I am almost directly over the Israeli building. It will be a famous number before long. It's building 31. It's on Straße. The security here remains terribly, terribly tight. Considerable speculation as to who the commanders are and as to whether or not there is any way that they can break out from here were they to try to escape. Looking at the area now, seeing all of the police, I cannot see that they would escape whatsoever. There's a great deal of speculation one could indulge in, which would be risky, but if I were to guess at the moment at which of the commando organizations this group is to come from, I'd be most likely to narrow in on a group called Black September. But with this first deadline passing and the next one now 4 hours away, my guess would be that this operation of theirs is more likely to fail than to succeed. That, however, is pure speculation. The last statement.
From the beginning of the takeover, details were sketchy as to how many terrorists were involved and how many hostages had been taken. One thing that had been made clear by the Black September terrorists from the start was the demand that over 200 Palestinian prisoners be released from Israeli jails. Otherwise, the hostages would be executed. While rounding up the hostages in the morning, the 8 members of Black September had captured 11 Israelis. Almost immediately, they had killed the weightlifting coach, Moshe Weinberg, as he was trying to resist. They shot and seriously wounded weightlifter Yosef Romano. The other 9 Israelis were tied to chairs and beds in fencing coach Andre Spitzer's room, with Yosef Romano dying at their feet.
Sunset, darkness, there's the Olympic Stadium, here's the village, where finally the Germans agreed to let the Arabs take their hostages to the heliport, still inside the village.
A bus was parked under 31 Straße that would drive the hostages and their captors to 2 helicopters. The choppers would fly them 20 miles to an airbase where a plane would be waiting.
My point of view was that it was wrong to change the location. That it would have been better to do the decisive action in the Olympic Village.
The final chaotic moments in the village were documented by ABC reporters communicating on walkie-talkies as they scrambled to piece together the movements of the hostages and their captors from Building 31 to buses and then to the waiting helicopters.
We've just gotten the final word. When I was a kid, my father used to say, our greatest hopes and our worst fears are seldom realized. Our worst fears have been realized tonight. They've now said that there were 11 hostages. 2 were killed in their rooms yesterday morning. 9 were killed at the airport tonight. They're all gone.
We have to identify the bodies. They're still somewhere, and then arrange the coffins and take them back home. Parents are waiting and wives are waiting. So.
The next morning, the Israeli contingent climbed aboard an El Al jet to accompany 10 coffins back to Israel. As the Israelis touched down in Tel Aviv, they were greeted by nearly 5,000 mourners, mad with grief. Yelena Romano had been heavily sedated since hearing the news that Yosef was killed. At the airport, she could barely walk across the tarmac to receive her husband's casket. There is one more thing the families want in order to have some closure with the events of Munich. For the IOC to incorporate a moment of silence in the opening ceremonies so the world can remember. Thus far, the IOC has refused, stating that the opening ceremonies is not the place for political statements.
My dream would be that my father would give that 1 minute, that the stadium will stand up for 1 minute, even less, and his name would be said, and 1 sentence, not a lot, but just to say, let's not forget what happened there. That's all. I think he deserves that. That would be my dream.
Munich teaches lessons about terrorism and politics and cruelty and love. But families of the athletes who were slain want Munich to be remembered, not only as a tribute to their loved ones, but also as a cautionary tale. We can choose to let the worst in our natures get the best of us, or we can choose a better way.
The story is not about 11 Israelis that were murdered. It's about 11 athletes who came in hope for friendship and fair play and in the name of sport and came back in coffins. That's not the Olympic idea. That's not the Olympic dream. And it should never happen again.
I would ask you to please all stand for 1 minute. Please. David Burgett, Zeb Giesman, Joseph Woodfriend, Eliezer Halpin, Amitzur Shapira, Gerhard Shaw, Mark Slavin, Andrei Spitzer, Jakob Springer, Moshe Weinberg, Tony Cooper.
David Berger, Joseph Woodfriend, Moshe Weinberg, Eliezer Halpin, Mark Slavin, Yosef Romano, Gerhard Shor, Andrei Spitzer, Amitzur Shapira, Yaakov Springer, Zev Friedman, שנהרגו ושמסרו נפשותם על קידוש השם ואהבו שכל הקהל מתפללים לעילוי נשמותיהם לא אין ולא רחמים יסתירם בסתר כנפיו לעולמים ויצרור חיים את נשמותיהם אדוני הוא נחלתם בגן עדן תהי מנוחתם וינוחו בשלום על משכבותיהם ויעמדו לגאולם לקץ היומין ונאמר אמן. Skadal Biskadash Shemay Rabon, Yomar Yibrach Yerusay Yamim Malchusay, V'chayechoin V'yemechoin V'chayed Ol Beis Yisrael, V'agolov Izman Koriv Yimru Amen. V'hei Shmei Ramu Barach Yolom Uliomei Omayod, Yismorek Yishtabach Yismorev Yisromon Yisnasei, Isador, Isalev, Isalosh, Medikulisha, Burichu, Leila min Kofri Chosa, Vishirosa, Tushbuchosa, Venechemasa, Amiram Biomad Imru, Amen. Yehei Shlomo Rabo min Shomaya, V'chaim Tvegim, Alein V'al Kol Yisrael, Imru, Amen. Oiseh, Shulrimov, Uyat Shom Aleinu, V'al Kol Yisrael, Imru, Amen.
Like Sam, I would like to very much thank you for coming here today. I think it's important to send a message to our community, to the general community, and above all, it's a gesture of support for the families. But because we're a people of hope and a people who always think the best will happen, I think it's appropriate to mention now, even though it's not part of the service, but I have been asked to mention it, and I will, that MDA is honoured to be bringing on the 11th of September one of the survivors from the Munich Olympics, 63-year-old Dana Long, who was a fencer at those games. I think that's a nice note. But really what I would like us to do is to reflect on why we're here today. We're here to remember the loss, the needless, tragic loss of 11 Israeli athletes, Olympians, slain at the 1972 Munich Olympic Games. In remembering them, we need to be very clear what this commemoration is about. It's not about the continued and outrageous targeting of Israel and its citizens. It's not about terrorism. It's not about man's inhumanity to man. And it's not about the complete degradation of the Olympic dream, which happened in 1972. It's about 11 lives lost. It's about 11 families shattered. It's about Jews doing what we have done for millennia and what we're about to do tomorrow and on Sunday and every other Tisha B'Av. It's about remembering our tragedies, honouring what we have lost, valuing our heritage, and in so doing, achieving the strength and the courage to continue our lives with dignity and in decency, regardless of what others may do or say. I'd like you to stand for the Hatikva, please.